Hello again. Welcome to a special edition of CropLife Retail Week. I'm Eric Sfiligoj, editor of CropLife magazine, here with two gentlemen who actually I'll let introduce themselves from Wells Fargo. We'll be talking about market trends. Michael Swanson and Lon Swanson. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me here today on CropLife Retail Week.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm Michael Swanson. I'm Wells Fargo's lead ag economist, have been doing this job for the last 22 years. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Lon Swanson.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And I am Lon Swanson. I'm here in Kansas City, where the sun is shining today, and looking forward to spring. But I cover the crop input space for Wells Fargo and see all of our customers in the fertilizer, chemical, and seed space.
Very good. And as we should probably point out to viewers, even though the last names are the same, I guess there is no relation between you guys. You just happen to share a name.
That's true, but we're very good friends.
That's right.
All right. Well, very good. Well, the reason I have you gentlemen join me today is I actually had the opportunity earlier this week to hear both of you speak at the Mid-America CropLife Association Lunch and Learn. And you were talking a little bit about the 2022 outlook. I guess you were calling it back on trend with ugly noise, I believe was the phrasing. So if you could, gentlemen, enlighten our viewers a little bit on some of the key trends, market drivers, concerns, and other things you discussed with the folks at the MACA meeting yesterday when you talked to them.
Well, absolutely. So we kind of broken into two pieces. I'll take the lead here and then hand the ball over to Lon. What we wanted to point out was, the farmers are in a very strong financial position. So we saw in 2020 and 2021, an interesting dynamic we see more or less pretty often during the cycles is they purchase their crop inputs, for prices based on the previous year's price of corn and soybeans and wheat. And then they had a nice run up in crop prices. So the combination of those inputs, land rents, led to very good profits. Same thing happened again in 2021. Even though they had higher input prices than 2020, they had even better prices in 2021. So here we are in 2022. Most of the crop inputs were set late in 2021, higher, of course, in 2020, but we're seeing much higher input prices, grain prices right now. So the farmers are set up for another year of good financial success. That doesn't mean they're happy with the current prices of inputs by any stretch of the imagination, but what it means is they can make money. Another element we want to consider, and we talked about during the Lunch and Learn, was that you have to compare things to the general economy. We're waiting for the GDP numbers at the end of this week, and they'll probably be north of $24 trillion because we ended 2021 at $24 trillion of GDP activity. So last time we had $7 corn and we had $16 soybeans, we had $6 trillion less of economic activity in the United States. So this economy does have the economic wherewithal to withstand the higher commodity prices. So the takeaway for the crop input supply world is this: farmers can afford these inputs. They don't like them, they're difficult, but they're in a financial position to do so. Now, the wheel always turns, and we talk a little further out about that situation. So we showed in the slide deck that, if you look at the combination of inputs to crops in a kind of a percentage way, there's been really good deal for the last couple of years. But obviously the war in the Ukraine, the Fed starting to fight inflation, supply disruptions from shipping around the world has led to a very rapid change in the price of fertilizer. And this is the point where I hand it off to Lon to talk about that change in the price, but what it means in terms of the buy and sell relationship for crop inputs.
Yeah, Michael, that's a great point, and it's been the hot topic, I guess, for everybody here, really over the last year or so, our fertilizer prices, and a lot of it is just the dramatic increase that we've seen. I mean, we've went from 2020 prices, which were basically at a decade low, to these prices we're seeing now, which are really at all-time highs. And so it's that dramatic increase that we've seen, and it isn't all driven by what's happening in Ukraine. A lot of the increase was last year, the second half of last year, all the black swan events that we've all been talking about, from higher grain prices to the higher fuel prices, cutting off the supply and production in Europe, weather events, always weather events in agriculture. So all those factors pushed those prices higher. But the thing that we try to get across is the fact you got to keep everything in relation to what we're seeing on the grain side of it and those prices. And even though we're taking a much higher percentage of the crop to pay for those fertilizer costs, it's still very profitable at this time. And one point that really kind of hit me in the face as far as a big factor was just seeing that fertilizer prices are so dramatically higher now than even your land rents in a lot of areas when you're talking about corn production. So those are things that really are unique at this time and that we need to be aware of. But everything goes in cycles, as we all know. And so as we're watching these prices move up, we also know there's going to be a backside to this. And so you got to manage that risk as you move into this period.
Lon, another point that you make often when you talk to the people is we look at the different dynamic between, say, the United States and Brazil. We really are two of the premier exporters in the world, and we have a very different fertilizer situation inherently. I mean, you make those points very, very well. So why don't you share that?
Yeah, no, that is a great point, and something that we'll be looking at going forward here, because as you move into Brazil's planting season, not now, of course, but as we move into the fall, they're going to need more. And we're fortunate in the U.S. We only need roughly 12.5% of our nitrogen to be imported, 9% of phosphates, but Brazil needs over 95% of what they need coming from outside of the South America area. So there are a lot of factors coming into play there. And in fact, they're talking to Belarus about opening up a separate port to bring in materials. So there's a lot of factors there, and the risk, even though we talk about risk here, I mean, we import a lot of potash, but it all comes from Canada. So it's local and not impacted as much on the political side of it. But Brazil across the board has to import about everything that they need for that crop production, and that's something to consider moving forward as they're looking at planting more corn going forward too. I mean, at $8 corn, they're gonna be looking at those prices.
And another thing we've discovered personally from traveling out east and into the southeast in the last couple of months together is that we depend upon a lot of the Russian imports was a matter of logistical ease on the East Coast. So Lon, talk about that, because we've talked to a lot of our handlers out there.
Yeah, that's right. And fertilizer is a world traded product. It isn't just strictly local, but different. I always consider it. I think of real estate. It's location, location, location. Well, that's kind of what we're dealing with here on the fertilizer front too. And a lot of our customers on the East Coast would be bringing in shiploads of fertilizer from that Black Sea area, and that, of course, has been shut off. So other sources are kind of filling in that gap. CF Industries is coming with a lot of materials coming into on the East Coast, but from the folks that I talk to, the materials available, you just got to pay for it. Now, unfortunately, those prices are very high. Although I'm seeing some change here recently of maybe peaking and starting to level out a little bit, just because some of the tenders that are sent out now aren't being fully invested in or taken up by the companies that are needing to take it on down the line to their wholesalers and the retailers.
One thing that we'll add is Lon and I have worked very carefully over the years, kind of try to work what we call the moneyball concept with the farmers, saying, where do you put your next dollar to get the best return? Is it NPK? Is it seed technology? Is it crop chemical? Is it machinery? Is it land? And so we have a technique of looking at what you trade for corn for what you get from the fertilizer. And it's interesting because it talks to the point that we discuss often is that the only person that can truly hedge away NPK, crop chemical, seed risk is the farmer, because they have access to that board to sell ahead of time, whether it's tomorrow's sale or 5 years into the future. Some of those contracts are available. Well, I recently had a conversation with people, at one of the major fertilizer producers, and they're perpetually long fertilizer. There's really nothing they can do to hedge away their risk. And so it is interesting how we're developing a new generation of risk managers as well as technology users. And one of the things we point out in a series of slides is there was a lot of different opportunities at different times between the combination of fertilizer and what the board was offering farmers. They're the only ones that can say, hey, can I do it for 20%, which is the standard, or do I wait for it to become 35%, which is very expensive? So where do I want to make sure I lock in my best value? And that leads us to the next part of the presentation we gave at the Lunch and Learn, which was interesting. It's talking about understanding the dynamic within the farming community. One of the charts that we use shows the cyclicality of return on assets, profitability in farming. And I went back all the way to 1997 in the Center for Farm Financial Management database. And I looked, is there a trend? Is farming becoming more profitable, less profitable? And the answer is no. It's cycles between major cycles where we've had great profitability and great losses. One thing we are seeing is consolidation. And consolidation has led to bigger and bigger units of farming. But it's not necessarily true that we show that the profitability is tied to size. So one of the things we talk about in the series of slides that we show is that when you see the breakout of cost of production, and one of my bumper stickers is farmers are paid by the bushel, landlords are paid by the acre. If you get that confused, you're really going to get hurt. So when you look at the gap between low cost and high cost producers, there's an amazing gap every year. And it could talk to weather events. Lon, you mentioned that already, but it really talks to just buying the right product at the right time and using it in the best, most advantageous way. We see $1.50 gap between the top quartile and the bottom quartile. That's an amazing $1.50 per bushel gap in cost of production. Some of it's weather related. Hopefully they get some offset from the crop insurance, but it speaks to that consolidation. So the last series of slides that we go through talks about that, understanding your sales dynamics. At the MACA Lunch and Learn, one of the things we like to have is some of the younger up and coming individuals in these companies. And it's a great community because they're going to work for different crop companies through mergers and acquisitions, from going across the street. And we know that today's junior person is very likely going to be tomorrow's senior person. And account management is one of those key aspects we talk about in this presentation. And so Lon, you used to be a farm manager, and you have some pretty good insights. So talk to us about what you've seen. You talk about how things are churning over with the technology.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I was a farm manager. I grew up on a farm, but then also as a farm manager for 15 years before I started with Wells Fargo. But what we're seeing is really passing that torch down to the next level, and the connection to that next level is more so on the technology side. The variable rate technology, the new products that are coming on board. It's passing that on down and utilizing that and getting that information to that next level. Who maybe doesn't want to sit in the office and drink coffee in the morning, but they're looking at their phones and trying to determine what the best product is that they need, and having that interaction and more technology to kind of push them down that line, whether it be mechanical or on the chemical side or on the seed. All of our technology that's been put into the seed now has been very profitable. Changes. I've seen a lot of changes over the years, and you can point a lot of that at the technology, at the seed, genetics and that side of it. But it's also the farming. I mean, the farmers have really stepped it up over time, and it's amazing how we see these trend line yields get, reach those levels every year. Who would have thought we'd be up to 172, 173 bushel level? Back when I was, cultivating every field twice and walking the bean fields, that just wasn't something that we were going to see. So again, that next level and that technology, we're doing so much now with fewer resources that I think that's a story that agriculture needs to tell, is how efficient we really are in what we're doing. And that's in every part of the country, whether it be East Coast or West Coast, with all the different crops that they have on the West Coast. It's amazing to me how they're being so successful in dealing with water and everything else that they're up against.
Oh, thanks, Lon. And so the final point we made on those slides is that it's incumbent upon people like financial service providers like Wells Fargo and the crop chemical companies to have channels that allow small, medium, and large buyers to access their products and services the way it makes the most money for everybody. So you certainly don't want to give a lot of time and desk time to somebody who's only buying a small amount, but you do need to have a channel that makes them efficient for your sales, because there's a lot of good solutions, large and small, through here. And so let's finish up with that last point there. Eric, you had mentioned earlier, something about California. The one anomaly right now in the quote unquote happy story, because when you see the slides, you'll see that the USDA estimates are for record crop receipts, record livestock receipts, and record farm income. There is an outlier in this world, and that would be California. For those that don't remember, California is the largest agricultural state in the United States by revenue. That's thanks to their premier strawberries, almonds, pistachios, citrus, a lot of high value crops, but high labor crops, high water crops as well. And California is in a tough spot. The droughtiness of California is a permanent feature. And they're currently implementing something called Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. SGMA is the acronym that you hear in California. And they're struggling to try to find out what's the right price for water and where. What's the right price for labor? What conditions can you use in the labor? And so we're seeing strong food prices, fresh fruits and vegetable prices at the supermarket. The consumer is really getting hit by this. But that doesn't mean that the California producer is reaping the benefits. A lot of that expense at the supermarket reflects higher freight rates in getting that product from California to Massachusetts. And so the California market is under a lot more margin compression than the general ag space, which is ironic. Early in, say, 2014 to 2016, California really had a run well above the US's general ag space. So it's not that they're perfectly in lockstep. And the higher input prices that we're seeing for crop chemical, lack of availability, and NPK is really hurting California's sector more than, say, corn and soybeans. When we have $8 corn on the Chicago Board of Trade, it's pretty supportive of higher crop input prices. But when almond prices are down from their peaks, like they are right now, it's not very supportive. So California is an important market, largest commercial agricultural state that we have. Number 2 is Iowa. Number 3 is Texas. Just a little trivia for those that enjoy trivia. And they're not in the same orbit and in the same marching order as the rest of agriculture right now. So that's really kind of what we shared with our friends at MACA. And it's always great to collaborate with this space, because we need you guys and gals to really provide those inputs, because we can't produce these crops without those inputs.
Okay. Well, Mike, one thing I do want to ask you about, since we're talking about California, I know not too long ago I had on an ag retailer talking with us, and he's based in California, Central California. And in his words, quote unquote, the state is this close to going 100% organic when it comes to its crop nutrient needs. And he was fearful that that would have some major implications going forward. A, have you heard about that potential move? And B, do you think it actually would happen? And C, if it did, what would it mean for California's agricultural market?
It would not surprise me. I'll be blunt. California legislature is really not very ag friendly when you look at what they've put out in terms of considering competitiveness they often, don't quite understand the process. So they'll put out legislation that requires certain activities that's not really well thought out. I mean, and that's a criticism, but I think it's a valid criticism. It doesn't surprise anybody that when such a large percentage of California voters are urban in their nature, they're not going to be ag, centric in that approach. So if California requires organic, obviously that's going to have some really major implications in terms of their performance, their yields. I mean, organic is a style of agriculture, and what you think about it depends on what you know about it. And so that would be a very interesting development. But we've already seen California's labor requirements, environmental requirements push a lot of production out of the state of California into Mexico, which is certainly not under the same regulatory approach and framework. In fact, I was out there last fall in November, and one of the producers out there told me if they had a completed field of squash ready to go, perfect condition, they still couldn't pick it because it wasn't worth enough money to pay for the labor to pick the squash. And and you think to yourself, that is astounding. He says, I need to have this field of squash in Mexico so that I can pick it, pack it, and ship it and make money. He says, I'd plow it under if it was here in California. And when we reach that type of a situation, that you think to yourself, we really need some more careful consideration around what it takes for that top agricultural state to remain the top agricultural state. So I really hope the coalition of agricultural businesses and producers out there can work with the consumers and the policy advocates to find a better solution to make everybody better off. That's really, cooperation is the name of the game out there.
Lon, anything to add to that?
No, it is eye-opening though, and California is a kind of whole different world as far as when you're dealing with all those different crops and the vegetables and the almonds and more edible crops coming out of the field than what we're see here in the Midwest. So I think the organic side of it has really taken hold there, faster, and there are products on the market that can help reach some of those goals. But unfortunately, there is going to be a higher cost of production over time, just because you're not getting, maximizing those yields like you would otherwise. So it's kind of a balancing act. And if they're willing to pay for, that higher cost of production, that comes into play and has to be considered.
I would add one more thing, Lon. The biologicals are kind of an interesting development that we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years. They're not regulated the same way as conventional crop chemical. That's been done on purpose. The FDA doesn't have that same type of regime for labels, but they're more inconsistent to some degree because even water. I mean, if you're going to put a biological on there and you have a poor water supply, it will really hamper the effectiveness. They're also very timely applications. If you apply a biological when it's not at peak productivity, it really might not work. So, I mean, what are you seeing in the biologicals out there? I mean, in general.
Yeah, no, it's definitely kind of a trend, and we're seeing more and more move that direction. You're exactly right when you're talking about the water being a factor. I mean, because we're talking about bugs, and you're trying to keep them alive. And one thing that we watch is the pH level and how that interacts and allows those organisms to live and do their job with the crop. And again, it's that inconsistency, like you mentioned, that is very hard to manage. And that's the toughest part of that is just when you put a product on your field, and any field is there's a lot of cost involved. But when you're talking about fields of vegetables and the high prices that it costs to do that on a smaller acreage basis, you can't take a chance, and you want to make sure you have that consistent performance, and it's getting there. There's more and more studies, more and more tests, and you're becoming more confident in what you're going to get, but it's just not there yet, and the percentage is still small compared to to the rest of the inputs.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you filling in our audience a little bit on what you talked about regarding the marketplace trends with our friends at the Mid-America CropLife Association. Now, since I have you, it's a tradition. We get to quiz you and see how good you are at some current events, if you will. It's time for fun with numbers. All right, so gentlemen, this is how this works. I'm going to hit you with a number. In this case, it's going to be a range, and they are dollar amounts. And then I will give you 4 options, 3 of which you will probably want to pick one of, and then a 4th one, which is just kind of fun. But your number, it would be dollar amount $60 to $65. So that is your number. So does $60 to $65, does that represent either A, the per acre increase in NH3 applications in 2022, B, the per acre increase in fuel costs for 2022, C, the per acre increase in crop protection product costs to manage resistant weeds in 2022, or D, is it the cost of a dinner for my son at his favorite sushi restaurant? So, gentlemen, what do you think?
What do you think, Michael?
And I'll let you know that D is not the choice because my son usually orders about 46 pieces of sushi. It's well over $100 usually.
As Swedes would say, "Ufta."
As I would say, 14-year-old with appetite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, Lon, it's either A or C. I think that might be a little bit high on the diesel side. It depends on the crop and how many passes, but I don't know. A or C are kind of sounding good to me, but you're my boots in the field kind of support here.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't think the crop protection, the herbicides have gone up that much of the inputs we looked at. So of those 2 that we narrowed down to, we'll go with A.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, Lon, you were correct the first time. It is actually the per acre increase in crop protection products to manage resistant weeds. I heard a speech earlier this year where the gentleman said that's estimated 1.5 billion is going to be spent by growers here in 2022 to help manage some of those hard to kill weeds like our favorite Palmer amaranth and water hemp here in the Midwest. So, but you weren't too far off on A. That was, I think that one was about $55, I believe is the number I found on that one. So you were close.
Okay, doggone it.
No, well, that's okay, gentlemen. You're I appreciate you being good sports nonetheless. So Michael and Lon, thank you very much for joining me today on CropLife Retail Week. Appreciate you sharing all your insights into the marketplace, and hopefully we'll look forward maybe to seeing you in a future segment down the line. Thanks for joining us, viewers. Hope you enjoyed this CropLife Retail Week, and we'll see you again real soon. If you have questions or comments about today's episode of Retail Week, contact us by email or Twitter, or type your message in the comment section below. Your feedback is important to us. We will try our best to address your thoughts in next week's episode, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.